Hello, my loves. Thank you for joining me today. We are going to talk about forgiveness, anger, shame, and its effect on our health. So, as you probably know, my name is Casandra MacAlan, and today I want to share some of my personal experience with dis-ease and managing my emotions of anger very recently, along with my knowledge of mind, body, spirit, health, and healing throughout my journey. So to start, I will share some of my favorite quotes around forgiveness from some traditional Chinese teachers. The first is, "Show me a body wherein lies dis-ease, and I will show you a body wherein lies unforgiveness." So let's sit with this for a moment and breathe it in, shall we? That's a pretty big statement. It really begs the question, does all of disease have a component of unforgiveness? Is it the unforgiveness of self or of others? Does it matter which? If you think back upon a time that you were ill in mind or body, were you also angry? Were you resentful? Did you want someone or something to be different than they were? Were you ashamed of yourself? Did you blame yourself or someone else for your illness or your struggle or your anxiety or your depression? I know for myself that every time my body has spoken to me with pain or dis-ease, if I'm honest, I was angry at a person or a situation, or I was fearful or stuck in shame. So here's some secrets about me. Since I have been working in holistic healing for the past 2 decades, I was never okay with being sick. It was an unwanted identity. It was what I treated. And I thought that if I was sick or ill or in pain, then that meant I was unworthy to treat it. And so I saw myself as too hard-headed to ever be ill because I had too fierce a will. I was a healer. And good healers, in my mind, had to be somehow immune to illness or anxiety or depression or injury. In fact, several years ago, when I was in the middle of my finals at UC Davis, studying the psychology of health, I became so ill that I couldn't really eat. I couldn't hold food down. I was constantly throwing up. And I just decided it was because of anxiety about grades, so I ignored the symptoms. Well, eventually, on the urging of my family, I went to the UC Davis Medical Center because apparently just calling yourself a baby and telling yourself to put your big girl panties on wasn't making it better. So after the tests were run, I was actually diagnosed with having several large gallstones and gallbladder disease. And the doctor told me at that appointment that I needed to schedule myself for surgery ASAP. And I told him that, of course, I couldn't do that because I was in finals. So then he told me that what would happen is one of these stones would block my gallbladder and it would burst. And if it did, I would have 1 hour at most before bile would destroy my organs and kill me. Pretty heavy duty, right? So obviously, what did I do? I thanked him for his opinions. I left and I went back to school. Yeah. I figured I would know when it was so bad I had to have surgery, and I didn't need him to tell me, that my body would tell me. And I'm very fortunate that I listened. For some weeks later, I eventually was rushed to the hospital for emergency surgery. So here's the scary part. If it wasn't that I was so foolish as to think I couldn't get sick, the whole time I had figured I was just weak and should have just toughed it out. And it wasn't until years later that I happened to be scrolling through some medical test results online looking for something. And I actually looked at the blood tests that were taken from me, and I was terrified. I would have actually died if I hadn't gone in that night. And believe it or not, up until that moment, I still hadn't forgiven myself for becoming ill and having to go to the hospital until I read those results. And I saw in black and white how sick I was. Because holding unforgiveness for self was a lifelong pattern that I had. You know, Brene Brown says that we live in a culture that despises the sick and that it sees illness as a sign of weakness. Do you agree? Because in some ways I do. And I know that for myself, I had seen up until that point, and occasionally have struggled since then, with seeing my own illness as a healer to be a sign that I have not healed myself. And therefore, I am not weak. However, perhaps that means I'm not good enough. And the really sad part is that this shame that our culture puts on people who are sick or in pain can create so much more of it. As Abraham Hicks would say, every thought vibrates. So when we are focusing on feeling shame or being unforgiving of ourselves or other people, our vibrational frequency lowers to a place where pain and illness grows and we get worse. When we focus on thoughts, however, that make us feel good about ourselves and others, then our vibrational frequency will rise to the place that our inner being can fully envelop us. And this puts us in the place of well-being. And there, our bodies will eventually catch up. This is important to remember, especially when we're dealing with anger and shame. My other favorite quotes are, holding on to anger is like drinking poison and waiting for the other person to get sick from it. Or holding on to a hot coal waiting to throw it at somebody else, but instead it only burns us. I have recently been struggling with anger. As you may know, if you've watched my lives, I've chosen to end a long-term relationship, and this was with somebody that I love. So it wasn't a decision that I made abruptly. It was a long journey in which I had been filled with simmering resentment until I was a person that I didn't like anymore. For me, anger doesn't sit well. I don't know if I can't metabolize it, I guess you would say. But if I get angry, I get ill. I feel it in my body. For me, being angry is like drinking poison. I can feel my face get hot, my blood pressure rise, my skin gets tight, my pulse speeds up, I feel nauseous, my muscles tense. I want to run or fight, and my body can't handle that nervous system response because I'm not going to run away or strike out. So what would I do? What do all of us do when we can't do that? We shove it down into our body. Has this ever happened to any of you? Has your body literally ached with anger? Have you ever noticed other sensations? How do you feel when you feel ashamed? For me, I feel that is a pit in my stomach, which also makes me feel nauseous and sick. And I also feel a desire to push away from everyone and everything, as if the shame is now some scarlet letter I'm wearing on my chest. And then that makes me feel angry. And then all those other things happen. When we shove anger down into our system like this, it comes out as pain in other ways. Even just that slow burn of regret, that too can create illness or anxiety or feelings of limitation. So what can we do? Well, firstly, we must remind ourselves that everyone is always doing the best they can do. Even when that best isn't good enough for us, it can still be their best. And can we really be unforgiving of someone who is doing their best simply because it isn't what we want? Secondly, when we think about our disappointments or resentments, I recommend that we repeat the following mantra. I forgive you for not being the person I wanted you to be. I do this as often as I need. It refocuses me on what I want now instead of ruminating on what I didn't get or what made me unhappy. And when you do this continual reframing or refocusing, it is literally creating new pathways for the joy and the happiness that we've been without. We're strengthening the neurons for positive feelings and thereby increasing our energy for health and wellness. You know, Joe Dispenza might say, when we do this and we begin to imagine this new future for ourselves or think about a new possibility and start to ask specific questions like, what would it be like to live without anger? What would it be like to feel forgiveness? What would it be like to have no shame? When we do that, our frontal lobe snaps to attention. And in a matter of seconds, it creates both an intention to be healthier and happier, so you can get clear on what you want to create and what you no longer wish to experience, as well as a mental picture of what being healthy and happy would look like. So you can place your energy and imagine that instead. Our body is our thoughts and our feelings in a form we can see. So if we are unhappy or ill or in pain or anxious or depressed, we need to release that anger, that frustration, that regret, that shame, that guilt, and that blame. And remember that our happiness is independent of the actions of anyone else. And then our body will be happy. So that's it for today. I hope that you found this interesting, and thank you so much for joining. I'm going to look at the comments. Okay, can you talk about how thought pain therapy and the therapy you offer works? That is, what protocols do you recommend to address the anger and the pain at the same time? Hope that makes sense. Wow. Well, some of the protocols, perhaps, if I'm getting this question correctly, would be understanding the connection between how specific thoughts and specific emotions can affect us in very uniquely specific ways. And I've done lives about that in the past, right? I will say, sharing more about me, when this relationship ended, then I started having a lot of pain in my foot. And I recognized it was because I was afraid that I couldn't stand on my own. I couldn't support myself on my own 2 feet. So sometimes helping to understand how specific emotions can affect us in specific physical ways, we can start with that pain or that symptom and work back and realize what it is that we're thinking. And once I began to reframe the thoughts I was having about my ability to support myself and be grounded and stable, well, wouldn't you know, the symptoms or the issue that I was having that they took x-rays for and told me there was nothing they could do now isn't bothering me anymore. So that can be a big help. I don't know if that answers that question. Someone else said, my body always feels my anger and my shame, right? And the more work we do to feel it so we can heal it, for me, the less I really can stand being in either of those spaces. And instead of shoving it down, I've now begun to realize that really what I can do is stop feeling victimized by other people. And that means changing how you feel or changing the situations that you're in. Because you can do both of those things. And then he said, and I project it. Yes, you know, shame is an emotion that I like to say is so hard to hold in the physical body that we can't. So when we feel shame, we have to project it outward, right? Unless we're conscious and we've done this work and, you know, we've done the thought pain therapy, then we do. We have a tendency to project it outward. So if we have this moment we're feeling shame, then we immediately want to say, well, you made me feel that way, or well, you did this, or if you hadn't have done that, this wouldn't have happened to me. Because unlike anger, which some people can just really stew in, and they can continue to think those thoughts for days, for weeks, for years, shame won't let you do that. It wants out. It wants you to act. And generally that action turns into a projection. That's really powerful to share. Thank you. Anger and resentment is so toxic, right? Show me a body wherein lies disease. I will show you a body wherein lies unforgiveness. And it generally is that anger and that resentment that creates that unforgiveness. I kind of like the analogy of the door. If every relationship that we have with someone is represented by a door, and every time there is an action or something is said that causes us to feel pain, or we feel pain because of, it's like hammering a nail in that door. And when amends are made or apologies are given, it's like pulling the nail out. But the hole still remains. And sometimes there's so many holes in the door, it just can't stand anymore. And that's when we know that the relationship has to end so we can heal. So crazy. My wrists and joint don't hurt as much anymore. But recently I got this pain in my right foot. Okay. So that is really powerful to see. So as we've talked about before, wrists and any part of joints all are about flexibility. So when we feel inflexible in life, like we can't make the changes or the choices we want to make, we have to do things we don't want to do, that tends to manifest in our joints. And of course, specifically, our hands represent our expression of heart's truth. So there's connections to be made there. Pain in our feet, as I said, standing on our own 2 feet. Right foot can also represent our feelings of being able to stand in effect of others, and left foot stand on behalf of self. Very helpful. You're welcome. Glad you're recovering. Yes, I am. I actually have very little pain, and the pain that I do have, it really is something that I allow to be in that moment. And then I remember one of my favorite phrases from the works of Abraham, which is, soothing is solving. And what that means is, when we are taking the time to just do things to make us feel better in that moment, in that microsecond, then that moment, that creates new energy and vibration for that feeling to continue. So the more moments that you focus on when you feel good, the more peaceful that you allow yourself to feel and patient that you allow yourself to feel when you feel good, if you're soothing yourself in just these little ways, that increases the vibration of that healing. And then, of course, your body has to follow. What is RIS? So we spoke about that. Soothing is solving. Yes. It's one of my favorite phrases. So when I have some discordant sensation or emotion, then I soothe myself. Maybe that's a cup of tea. Maybe it's sitting down and taking a rest because I don't have to do all the things that I think I have to do. Maybe it's shifting our self-talk. One of the tools that I use constantly is thought pain therapy is when I am thinking something that makes me feel bad and I notice I am feeling sad and angry or resentful or alone or fearful, I literally stop and say, what am I thinking? And then I change those thoughts. And guess what? The emotion changed too. And I know that not letting them repeat and ruminate means that I don't need to manifest something physical in my body to get me to make that really dramatic change. So the quicker that you can reframe your thoughts, the quicker you can not only heal from whatever is bothering you now, but you can prevent something from coming into the future to show you thoughts that you need to release. So I hope that helps. I'm sending you all so much love. Thank you for joining me today. And take care of yourself for me. Okay, I'll see you next Monday. And as always, if anybody has anything particular or specific that they want to share, I love it when you put it in the chat. And if you want me to do a live on it, then I will. Okay. I'll see you next Monday. Bye.